Welcome to Promote, Profit, Publish. I'm your host, Juliette Clark, and I'm pretty excited about today's guest because you guys are going to get an update on the audiobook world. But before we get started, I want to remind you to run over to Breakthrough Author Magazine, download your free subscription. It's www.breakthroughauthormagazine.com. And lots of tips and tricks about writing, platform building, publishing, aftermarket book marketing, and all sorts of free things over there. And our theme this year is how to ditch that middleman, those strategies to bypass the 55% that you have to pay the distributors. So if you're someone who wants to make money on that book and isn't happy with the $1, $2, $3 that the royalties are a piece now, learn how to make more money by downloading the magazine, www.breakthroughauthormagazine.com. And don't forget to go over to our book club. We have Breakthrough Authors Book Club. It's www.breakthroughauthors.bookclub.com. And that is probably the only Amazon book club where you have access to the actual authors. So you can ask questions, you can find out more about what they do. If you want to work with them, you can find out how to work with them. Now, when you go over to that URL, Breakthrough Authors with an S magazine or bookclub.com, you will have to sign into your Amazon account to join. But love to have you guys over there and really showcase not only our authors, but read some really good books that probably don't get as much press as some of the bigger authors out there. So today's guest is Tina, and Tina is the founder, Tina Dietz. Tina Dietz is the founder and CEO of Twin Flame Studio, an award-winning audio publishing house dedicated to cultivating cultures where excellence, creativity, and innovation thrive. Her first podcast, The Start Something Show, was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 35 podcasts for entrepreneurs. And her latest podcast, Drink from the Well, reaches more than 300,000 people around the world that are thirsty for her leadership elixir. Tina is also an award-winning and internationally acclaimed speaker, audiobook publisher, podcast producer, and vocal leadership expert whose work and shows have been featured on media outlets including ABC, NBC, CBS, The Wall Street Journal, the Chicago Tribune, and Inc. magazine, and Forbes. She's been named one of the top podcasters for entrepreneurs by Inc. magazine, and Twin Flame Studios reimagines thought leadership through podcasting and audiobooks for experts, executives, and founders. So this is going to be a really illuminating episode because if you think about publishing a book, many people are listening via audio today. So find out whether you need that audiobook as part of a multi-platform strategy as well. Hang on for that interview with Tina. Tina, welcome. We are excited to have you back.
I'm happy to be here.
I know it's been over a year now, but my audience is always curious about, is an audiobook worth it? And where's the market going? And should it be a part of my multi-platform strategy?
Well, if you have a multi-platform strategy, then choosing to do an audiobook definitely needs to be evaluated as a part of that. And most of the folks that we work with, because we specialize exclusively in nonfiction and even more deeply in author-narrated nonfiction, the 95% of our clients are in the same position. And I was a business coach for many years before I pivoted into audio. So I deeply believe that you have to have an integrated approach if you're going to consider having an audiobook, having a podcast, or working with any medium that's going to take your time, energy, and money. But here's a couple of things to consider specifically about audiobooks is that an audiobook shouldn't be just a book as a product. It also should be a marketing asset for you. And if you're somebody who is branding themselves through their voice, through their actual physical voice, not just what I call your big V voice, which is kind of the voice of your message, then having an audiobook creates consistency. It creates another platform for people to be able to find you and access your work at a fairly low cost, just like your book does. It's that $20 range that most people who are in business or in the conversation about personal and professional development, self-help, all of those realms, people will buy books, they will buy audiobooks. And so it's an entryway into your brand. It's also really powerful, and we can talk about this further, specifically because you are getting to spend anywhere from generally 3 to 8 hours as a voice in somebody's head. And there are very real neurological impacts on that in terms of the relationship development and the influence that we have as leaders, quite literally on the direct track into somebody's mind. So there's a lot of reasons to create an audiobook. Certainly, like I said, to sum it up, product efficacy of reaching an audience in a deep and intimate way, and as a marketing asset. And we can talk further about how that actually looks if you want as well. But those are the three primary things you want to consider when you're looking at doing an audiobook version of your book.
Yeah. Now, you guys specialize in author-narrated, which means the author gets to read their own book. And you provide an actual producer, and the producer is there not only for the organization and the flow, but there are some mistakes that typically are made. I know I had a guy record his own, and I could hear, and I do this myself when I speak, the huffing. So can you talk a little bit about those? I know I huff and I puff and I blow your book down.
Exactly.
But can you talk a little bit about that? Like, I know some people are probably thinking, well, I can do this on my own. It is much, much harder than you think it is.
Much harder than you think it is. Yeah. So anybody can read their own audiobook, but can you do it well? It's the same conversation. Anybody can be a YouTuber, anybody can be a podcaster, anybody can be a blogger, anybody can be a public speaker. Can you do it well? And that's what we're going for. So my company, Twin Flame Studios, over the years, we are the premier provider of remote recorded author narrated audiobooks in the world. And the reason we do it that way is to provide accessibility for authors, to provide a level of comfort, which is really important when you are doing an audiobook because it is a long form narration process. And it also it helps with the cost. It helps with a lot of things to be able to do it remotely rather than having to go into a studio format. And in an age where we are dealing with AI voices, artificial voices, all of that is kind of coming up. Somebody's authentic voice is truly part of their brand. And the way that your voice comes across to people is important. There are about 6 or 7 primary factors in the quality and tonality, the tempo, the breathing, all of these things in somebody's voice that are highly correlated in research with people's perception of somebody's credibility, of their trustworthiness, of their leadership ability. And if you are just kind of speaking off the cuff, as a lot of people think they can do in an audiobook, you are doing yourself a huge disservice because you don't know the impact that you are making that you don't want to have on somebody. So having somebody who is not just a audio engineer, so an audio engineer and a producer or a director are two different things. So an audio engineer is to make sure the audio quality is there and to make sure that the words get spoken the way that they're written. A director or producer is there for the performance. And those are very different. So when we work with authors, our producers cover all of those roles. So we are making sure that not only is the audio quality high, but that the audio quality is consistent from session to session. We quite literally can hear if you've had a bad day and something needs to shift. That comes up in meetings and in sessions. We can hear if you've been, really stressed out, your breathing pattern changes. So those things get brought up in these sessions so that you can become aware of it and adjust and hear for consistency how your voice needs to be from session to session. In addition to us catching mistakes or finding where you've trailed off or you've mumbled a word or you are breathing in a way that is really loud or strange, or you're kind of cutting off sentences. There's a lot of things that happen in people's vocal patterns that are so habitual, we can't hear them ourselves. And they can really hurt credibility. So, for example, a lot of people uptalk the end of their sentences like it's a question, but it's not a question, but we can't hear it. And that's one of those things we have to coach people out of sometimes, because when you speak with uptalk at the end of your sentences, it diminishes your credibility because it sounds like you're unsure of what you're doing.
Yeah, and I have played with it a little bit. We were actually going to read one of my old fiction novels on YouTube to boost our YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm.
And I found I don't read well out loud anymore. Like I know when you're in the third grade, you have to, you get really good at it. I do not. I'm used to speaking on the cuff, and there can't be anything worse than hearing me breathing heavily in your ear while you're, you feeling the heat while I'm talking about a business book. Like I don't know, a lot of times I'll get that huffing in there and I sound more like an 800 or 900 number than
Yeah, exactly.
Hey
And
baby.
and we can reduce some of that with, post-production audio magic, but our goal is always to get the best quality of performance on the first go round, because that always produces the best effect.
And there you go. And if they can't do that with you, they will get you a 900 number issued so you can start a new career. How's that? So, tell us about what you guys are up to. You guys also have a podcast platform. If you're One of the things that I really believe is, if you're a podcaster, you should read your own book because it is part of your brand. Do a lot of your podcasters do that?
Yeah, most of our podcasts actually arise out of our work with our authors. Most of the podcasting that we do, it falls into um, podcasting styles that are book companion podcasts. These are short form, not short form, but intentionally brief or limited series podcasts that allow our authors to dip a toe into podcasting with a very specific purpose, and launching their book with a book companion podcast that allows them to engage readers, allows them to bring people in. It's almost can be used as an online book club. I actually have one author who works a lot with corporate training, and he's specifically offering his podcast into the employee resource groups that he works with as a resource. And then they're piggybacking off of that into other projects and things like that. So that's a strategy that I really like, that I propose to folks in that particular area. We also do monthly thought leadership podcasting, which is a little bit different than the weekly or biweekly traditional podcasting that most people are most familiar with. And that's where we very intentionally, through even search engine optimization, search terms for somebody's website, will craft topics that are crucial and central to that company or that author's platform, and create one episode a month that is more deeply produced, more perhaps a little bit more elaborate or longer form, maybe 45 minutes or so instead of a half-hour show. And then that material gets repurposed a number of different ways. It's turned into an article that for LinkedIn, in addition to the show notes, the templates, the social media posts, the video clips, all the other things that we tend to do with podcast content, newsletters. And that helps their audiences not suffer from content overwhelm, and allows the host to go much more deep into a topic and narrow rather than broad. It also helps our hosts kind of own their platform. Even if they're having other guests on, they're still owning that expertise and owning that space on the topics that they're interested in, and bringing in other people to enrich that conversation rather than do a straight up interview where they're acting in more of a facilitator role.
Yeah, we actually do that. We have a monthly training the first Friday of every month, and we invite people, listen to it. If you want to go over and actually see the slides, go over to YouTube. But I love that format because people show up, it's a live training, and they ask questions. And I would say probably 95% of the questions asked are things that probably the average person is thinking, but doesn't have access to someone to ask. So I think it really is more enlightening to hear that other people have the same sorts of questions on their mind that you do.
Yes.
Because I know people are like, oh God, I don't want to ask this. I just seem stupid. And you'd be surprised how many other people are thinking exactly the same thing. It's, there's no such thing as a stupid question on it. So if you're
Exactly.
gonna do a limited one, do you do is that 6 episodes, 8 episodes? How does that work with the limited?
It depends on the length of the content. I generally am going to recommend anywhere from 6 to 12 episodes, depending on the depth of the content that you want to go into. And it helps our authors kind of manage their risk if they're new to podcasting and they're not sure they're going to like it, or they're not sure, what the process is going to be of, if it's their best use of time and energy. So even if they decide to walk away from podcasting at the end of that, they still have just this gorgeous series that they can use and repurpose and hold up as almost another book in some way, shape, or form. I was talking the other day with someone who said, "Have you asked me if I had written a book?" And I said, "Well, I've written chapters for books, but mostly I've produced podcasts, because my podcasts that I've produced over the years are very similar to what someone would do to actually produce, at least in terms of time, energy, and money, to actually produce a book. And they've had very specific purposes over time."
And I could actually see this, you repurposing this into a course too,
Oh,
because
sure.
most people who aren't listening to a podcast or are listening to a podcast, if they see that visual, if you're recording, YouTube or a video at the same time, you now have pretty much a course that you just have to make up a workbook for.
Yep, you can do content libraries. We can pull together wisdom guides at the end of series. There's a lot that can be done. And the same thing with your audiobook. That's another area with your book and your audiobook. You really ought to be considering, can you use your book and your audiobook to create a mini course as an entry level product for your enterprise, whatever that happens to be? Can you create something that is 3 sessions long, 4 sessions long, that maybe gets dripped out via email, not even necessarily on a course platform, to help people get to know you and enjoy your work and draw them in further into a relationship with you? We're bombarded so much with material every day. Um, we're at a point now in history where it's important both for us to focus our time and energy on the most important, very specific things that we want to coach, train, and teach and inspire, and that are also going to be deep and rich for our audiences, so that when they come to us for, this body of work that we're offering, that they can actually keep up to a certain extent with the amount of content that we're producing, where it's steady, but not a deluge of information.
Yeah. And then the other thing you can do with that is, if you're afraid that, okay, I'm going to do this limited podcast and then nobody will hire me to do the work, you're kind of sorely mistaken, because most DIYers will try it, but they need other pieces of your expertise. So you could actually put this together to nurture people into buying that bigger course and getting the details as well. I think there's a statistic out there that a good 90% of the people, if you give a how-to tutorial, will not do it.
Oh, that's
So,
true.
yeah. Most people will look at it. It's like those same people who go to a Jack Canfield event and they'll say, "Oh, I went to Jack Canfield," but you can tell they never did the work. Type of.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we humans are humans, we're super cute. We're not always so bright. It's okay. We're getting there. We're all doing the best we can. We're
I
all
love
doing
that.
the best we
I'm
can.
going to steal that. That's
Yeah.
pretty funny. So where do you see the audio market going? I mean, I know that most serious authors with serious programs, are doing this, but do you think that that's going to be the way that we consume most of this in the future? Because I think I've seen just a big uptick even since 2020, since COVID.
Oh, here's the thing about the audiobook market. It's well over $1 billion market in the US alone. And the audiobook market has had double-digit growth year on year for 10 years running. This is not a fad. I mean, audiobooks have been around since 1930. They're not going away. It's the most accessible form of media. I always say you can listen when you can't read, you can listen when you can't watch. So busy people default to audio, and younger people are listening to audio more and more. Diverse audiences are listening more and more. I mean, audiobook listening has doubled in the last 5 years. It's almost 2/3 of Americans listening to podcasts on a weekly basis. Audiobooks aren't that far behind,
Mhm.
and we're people just continue to grow with it. People, you know, a lot of folks have one of the things we're finding in society right now is the prevalence of what's being called neurodivergence. And I'm not disputing that term at all. And at the same time, there's just so much diversity among humanity and how we like to consume things. I think having variety is a wonderful thing because a lot of our books, our audiobooks that we produce, and this is how I consume things too. I'll listen to the audiobook, but then I'll buy a hard copy of it as well. That happens constantly with nonfiction, absolutely constantly, because that you get actually through the book because that's what you have time for on a walk in your car, if you're doing dishes, if you're working out, if you're waiting for your kids, you grab the audio because it's accessible. And if you're like me, you listen to it a little bit faster. And you do. Certain voices, you're like, okay, pick up the pace, let's go. And that's fine. That's what it's designed for. And then I want to do a deeper dive on certain topics. I'll go and grab the book and then work through the exercises or grab a workbook to go with it and get more out of it than I would have if I had tried to make the time to read the book in a hard copy or even on a Kindle.
Yeah, and I have to say, I do listen on an accelerated speed also, and I find it doesn't serve me well in life because everybody's speaking like this. Because I'm used to listening to like, 1.5, 2 times the speed. So it
Yeah.
seems like everybody's taking a long time. But here's another thing you can do with this audiobook is if you have exercises in your book or you have a workbook accessory, one of the downsides is when someone buys a book from a distributor, whether it's an audiobook, a print book, an ebook, is that you can't you as the author don't get to lead capture. If you create an audiobook and you have those accessory exercises or a workbook that people can download for free, now you've just lead captured with your email list. So it does behoove you to put something there that people can go grab that's kind of a bonus for buying that book as well.
I completely agree.
Yeah, on that. So Tina, thank you so much for being on and sharing all this today. Where can people find you if they would like to find out if they have the voice? Or maybe let's talk about that first before we go.
Oh, sure.
Your people are self-narrators on this. How do you know your voice is right to do your own book?
That is an important question. And we do full service audiobook production. So if someone comes to us and they're not sure, we have professional narration. We have hybrid versions where an author can do part and a professional narrator can do part. We're very picky about how we pair narrators with the author, and we don't take rights or royalties. We are, author advocates, so we're always looking for both a good vocal match and a good energy match amongst our narrators. And we'll go through like 120 narrator auditions per book for those particular books. But when someone's looking at doing their own book, they need to be able to be reasonably sure that they're not going to hate it, that they're not going to hate doing the process. That's actually the most important thing. That is really the most important thing. Is this going to be a slog for you? Because
Yeah.
nobody is going to want to hear that background, I don't want to do this, underlying your voice. It will come through, I promise you.
Mhm.
The other thing is, and we have to look at, is this the best use of your time, energy, finances, all of that? And there are some situations where somebody's voice, even professional public speakers, that we run into this regularly. Someone is so dynamic and wonderful and fabulous for a 1 hour keynote. They're an amazing trainer, coach, consultant, but you don't want to listen to them for 4 or 5 or 6 hours on an audiobook because they might have a vocal quality that is grating over
Mm.
time.
Mhm.
Because certain people have an energy that is so high that something you want to hear from that stage and they're doing so great. And it's like, oh my God, this is amazing. If you had to listen to that for 2 or 3 hours, your adrenals would be spent. So that's where we often use the hybrid version. So you get all of that energy at the beginning or the end of the book or in a piece of each chapter. And then there's a narrator who can match a nice vocal tone and that higher energy, but also can create a little bit more of a pace that is going to be consumable. So
Yeah.
something like that happens. And then we run into certain things that are medical factors, physical factors. We did an amazing book for the former chief learning officer for General Electric, a fabulous, amazing man, but he had had 18 surgeries for throat and neck cancer.
Oh.
But he couldn't narrate his full audiobook. Merrill Hodge, who's known for his work on ESPN, former football player, amazing dude. We did his as a hybrid because one of the things he talks about and that his book is about post-concussion syndrome. And so for him, actually going through the whole book required a level of focus that his nervous system just wasn't compatible with. So, and we've had some folks who may have had severe dyslexia that couldn't do their entire book. So we did hybrid versions and things like that. So we always work through what's going to be best for the author's time, energy, and budget, and what's going to be best to serve the work. Ultimately has to be about serving the work, getting out in the world. So those are the conversations that we have.
Yeah, I remember from my advertising days, we were always told to speak to the client with a smile on your face, even on the phone. And
That's right.
I feel like you have to do the same thing. Although they followed up giving us a voodoo doll for Christmas. So I don't know. For me, that was speaking with a smile on my face and
message.
thrusting the pen into the doll. Like, I can't do this. How am I going to do this? So, Tina, where do we find you if we want to talk more about either doing a podcast or an audiobook?
Well, if you don't have a voodoo doll of me, you're welcome to reach out. And you can find me and my team at twinflamesstudios.com. Both flames and studios are plural. And if you look up Twin Flames Studios on any of the socials, you'll find us there. And if you just Google Tina Dietz, I am the first instance on Google that you will find. So not hard to find us at all, but please feel free to reach out. We've got lots of resources, FAQs, all that good stuff to help you learn more about if audiobook or podcast is a good path for you.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing all this with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.